Britain's major galleries house some of the finest collections of art to be found anywhere in the world.
But there are thousands of other artworks we know little about in the collections of smaller institutions. Over 80% of this publicly owned treasure is in storage and often uncatalogued. We don't know the name of the artist, the subject, or when and where they were painted.
The Art UK website was created to shine a light into these shadows, and now has over 200,000 paintings online. Using this database, we'll be travelling the country, seeking out potential lost masterpieces. When we find an interesting painting, I'll investigate the story behind its creation, using a meticulous process of restoration, research, and scientific analysis.
I'll be exploring the world in which these works were created, the social and historical background to the life of the artist, which gives a painting its context. But simply finding a painting is just the beginning of the trail. There's been a great house at Petworth in West Sussex since the Middle Ages, and the present mansion, one of the Baroque treasure houses of England, was built in 1688.
Petworth has everything you'd expect from a ducal palace. Painted halls and grand rooms of state, all set in a park laid out by Capability Brown.
It's not too shabby, is it?
Big, yeah. And tacked on the edge here, the purpose-built picture gallery. Every home must have one, don't you think?
Of course. After the Second World War, facing a large bill for death duties, the house was accepted by the government in lieu of tax and has been in the care of the National Trust ever since.
Along with the mansion came many of its remarkable paintings and sculptures, the largest collection of art in the care of the Trust.
Andrew Laux is the house manager.
Hi. Come in, Scully.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Andrew, I believe the house is operating on the winter schedule at the moment.
That's right, yes. So we only have access by guided tour, and actually a lot of the collection is still covered up for conservation reasons, but there's still a lot to see.
There certainly is. Petworth is something of a jewel in the National Trust crown. And while Bendor sets off to explore a truly world-class picture collection, I'm looking forward to getting better acquainted with the mansion.
We get about 150,000 visitors a year. And of course, places like this weren't really originally designed to accommodate that level of visiting. Much of our work is about showing the place off to visitors, but also taking care of it to make sure that it lasts for future generations.
My goodness, what a beautiful room.
Yes, this is the famous carved room, which was largely the creation of George O'Brien Wyndham, the third Earl of Egremont, who in many ways is the person who's largely responsible for the appearance of the house as we experience it today.
The carvings that gave the room its name are by Grinling Gibbons, a giant of English Baroque decoration, whose work can be seen in Windsor Castle and St. Paul's Cathedral, as well as here at Petworth. This was originally a dining room and has 4 painted panels by J.M.W. Turner.
They're hung at this low height because they were intended to be seen from a dining table. 2 of them are representations of the views of Petworth Park, which you get through the windows behind us. Interestingly, as well as the 2 Petworth subjects, we've got 2 what were then modern industrial subjects in Brighton Chain Pier and the Chichester Canal, and both of these 2 projects were invested in by the third Earl himself.
The art collection at Petworth is one of the largest in any British stately home, but it is also one of the finest, with pictures from the biggest names in art history. One artist who is very well represented here is Sir Anthony Van Dyck. There are 17 Van Dycks in the house, and I'm especially interested in this one up here.
But Doctor, I hear you shout, there's a massive label on the frame saying Rubens, not Van Dyck. Well, I know. But I'm not the first person to be convinced that the name on the frame is completely wrong.
Resilient organisations know that data is power. They know data needs to be available anytime, anywhere, to keep the business running. This is data resilience, and Veeam is its home.
With a bit of daylight on the subject and a scaffolding to get me up close, we can have a proper look at the painting. On the Art UK website, it's listed as Portrait of an Unknown Genoese Lady. She's wearing the style of dark dress that was fashionable in Genoa in the 1620s, when Van Dyck was working in the city.
There are no records to tell us exactly when this painting came to Petworth, but I think we can be pretty sure from the label that whoever bought it was convinced it was by Rubens. I'm convinced it's by Van Dyck. Now, it's not unusual for the two artists to get slightly muddled up, not least because Van Dyck was Rubens's best pupil. But there are so many details here which to me scream Van Dyck.
Van Dyck's flesh tones are smoother and less defiant than Rubens's, far more naturalistic, exactly as we see here. The painterly glints of light in the gold chain are typical, and really telling, the long, elegant fingers of the hand, a Van Dyck hallmark.
Now, I'm going to be rather bold here because Van Dyck is my favourite artist, and I think if there's one artist I dare to say I'm qualified to pronounce on, then it's Van Dyck. So, if this isn't by Van Dyck, well then, to be honest, I'll eat my trousers.
Unfortunately, this painting has lost a lot of its surface detail from past botched restorations, and it's in such poor condition, there's nothing much we could learn from any further cleaning. It's had rather too much of that sort of attention already. In the room next door, there's another important picture that I think we can do something to rescue. And in a funny way, they're connected.
Now, in times past, this used to be the entrance hall. Visitors would come in off the glories of Capability Brown's wonderful parkland. And when they got here, one of the first pictures they saw was this photo over the fireplace. Now, such an important position in the house required an important painting. And in the early 19th century, they put this picture here, believing it to be by Titian, the great Italian Renaissance artist. But nowadays, on Art UK, for example, it's just described as Portrait of an Unknown Cardinal by an unknown artist in the style of Titian.
The thing that immediately struck me, seeing it on Art UK, is how well painted the head is.
It feels to me like there's a really good picture fighting to get out there, such presence. And the old label has been tucked onto the bottom of the frame here, and it says Titian. And unlike the picture next door, which I think is certainly not a Rubens, I wonder if this old label might actually be right.
That would be a tremendous coup. Titian was born in 1490, and his technical mastery has rarely been equalled. He revolutionized painting, and much of what we take for granted in art today can be traced back to him.
Well, this is a real conundrum, this picture. It's a bit like the curate's egg, good in parts. I'm still struck by the quality of this face. It's excellent. Some of the detail in the eyes. Oh, it looks really good. And yet other parts, this hand, well, that's no good at all. It's very claw-like and clumsy.
But the face gives me confidence. I think there's a possibility that, at least, may have been painted by Titian himself.
So, we've got a maybe Titian here, and maybe or very likely a Van Dyck there. What's the connection? Well, both artists became the darling of British art collectors, including the people who put the collection together here at Petworth. Titian, the genius of late Renaissance Italy, and Van Dyck, the genius of Baroque Flemish art a couple of generations later.
but there's an even stronger connection between them. Van Dyck became a great painter by immersing himself almost fanatically in the work of Titian. It was as if one genius handed the baton of artistic brilliance onto the other.
And it was a relationship that changed the course of British art.
Our picture restorer, Simon Gillespie, has made the trip to Petworth to assess the fresh-faced cardinal on site.
Titian, what do you think?
Well, it's got lots of things that suggest that it is.
The thing I always look for in a Titian portrait is that sort of sparkle in the eyes he seems to get, and only really Titian can do it.
Yeah.
There's definitely a sparkle in this eye.
Yeah, there's some wet, juicy stuff in there, isn't there? Yeah. Parts of this have survived very nicely. You see how the halftones here have survived as well. And when that's cleaned properly, he'll have much more three dimensions.
I'm so excited. I'm fidgeting. I think this could be our most significant picture yet. But it's a picture of two parts, because this terrible hand here. What's going on?
It seems to have something added down at the bottom here.
Oh God, the stitching. It's like a bad appendix scar, isn't it?
The stitching has come through to the front of the canvas, which suggests it probably isn't original. And the bottom of the hand is probably not original as well because of that.
That's good, because these fingers are no good.
No. Well, they're disjointed, and they've been run over by a bus.
Yeah. Oh, terrible.
And there's a lot of indiscriminate overpaint that goes over original paint.
Yeah. I don't think we've got any chance at the moment of presenting this as anything nearly like a Titian. So we could say that this is Titian impossible.
As one of the most significant characters in the creation of Petworth, I thought I'd take a look at the story of George Wyndham, 3rd Earl of Egremont, canal enthusiast and chum of the painter J.M.W. Turner.
It's so lovely to be able to come back to the spot where a landscape painting was made and see that pretty much nothing has changed. And that's the situation with the view that Turner painted for the 3rd Earl of Egremont 200 years ago.
The cathedral steeple and the blue line of the South Downs are still visible. And in fact, the only detail that will never match is the setting sun, an invention by Turner as the view is looking north. The canal was part of a proposed inland waterway linking Portsmouth Harbour with the Port of London. During the Napoleonic Wars, the journey by sea put cargoes at risk from French marauders in the English Channel. When peace with France came, the project was abandoned, and the Earl, who had invested heavily, lost a considerable amount of money. Some of his other projects paid dividends, though. In the century after 1750, as Britain became industrialised, the population tripled to over 16 million people. New agricultural practices and more efficient working methods were needed to feed the industrial cities. The Earl was one of the pioneering landowners who put these new methods into practice, but he had another novel solution for dealing with a rapidly expanding population: the Petworth Emigration Scheme. His estate tenants, who could be a drain on a landowner's resources, were offered the opportunity to start a new life in Canada. The Petworth archives preserve the records of these voyages.
It was really well organised. First of all, they used to advertise for people to go. And this is one of the posters that they sent round. And it tells you how much Lord Egremont would pay towards the cost. So if he owned all the property in your parish, he paid the lot.
And how many people would he have sponsored in this way?
Well, about 1,800 went altogether, but probably about 1,500 from his estates.
The emigrants sailed from Portsmouth Harbour on ships chartered by Lord Egremont. By all accounts, it was not an easy passage.
We have the log of the England that went out in 1833.
This is the original?
Yes. Saturday 27th, many of the people distressed with seasickness. Brandy administered in plentiful doses, sometimes mixed with laudanum, as a soother.
While it may have sounded a philanthropic scheme, in fact, as a landowner, the Earl was responsible for supporting his tenants if they fell on hard times.
There was really quite a sarcastic comment in one of the local papers.
How exceedingly amiable of the Earl of Egremont to defray out of his own pocket the expense of sending his fellow creatures out of the country.
It has to be said it was quite convenient to get rid of excess labourers, because there were a lot of families that went on poor relief every winter, every time there was a harsh winter. So it could be argued that if you pay once and for all to send them to Canada, they're off your hands.
Just in case all this talk of canals and immigration is beginning to make you think the third Earl was a dull old stick, let's have a look at his personal life. In 1763, only 12 years old, George Wyndham inherited the titles and estates of Petworth, Egremont in Cumbria, and Leconfield in Yorkshire.
But the cherry on the top was this mansion, Egremont House, newly built by his father in the fashionable end of Piccadilly.
After George moved in, this austere Palladian pile quickly acquired a reputation as something of a party palace.
Aged 21 and recently returned from his grand tour of Italy, George was one of the most fashionable young men in town. But the fashion he was associated with was an odd one. He was a macaroni.
Originally used to mock young aristocrats who had returned from their grand tours full of praise for the pasta they had been eating in Italy, macaroni had been adopted by the press to make fun of any fashionable dandy and had become common parlance in the 1770s. Macaroni dress had several key features, the main one being a very high wig with a very small hat perched on top, more for decoration than any practical purpose. At the back of the wig was a colossal bundle of hair folded back on itself and held in place with a ribbon. This was known as a cadogan. The young Earl of Egremont may not have sported this get-up, but being a young aristocrat leading a party life in London would have been enough for the press to describe him as a macaroni.
In the less rarefied East End of London, our young cardinal from Petworth has been under the all-seeing eye of the X-ray and infrared camera at Art Analysis and Research. And Nick Eastall has the results for us to look at.
It's a very damaged painting. You can see lots of losses here. And this line across here is probably where it was folded at some time. It's a typical sort of damage that we see.
In a strange way, I find that reassuring, Nick, because the hand is not at all well painted. And if we can excuse its badness as a result of its condition, then I think that helps to make the case for the rest of the painting.
Yes, absolutely. But there's very high quality painting underneath, nonetheless.
Can we focus in on what I think is the really good bit, the face?
Now this, I think, is a really good piece of painting.
It looks a lot freer and sort of more spontaneous in the X-ray than what we can see in the picture at the moment.
We're seeing inside to the structure rather than just at the surface. So some of these kinds of more spontaneous, freer features come out.
Sure.
So because you're looking at the deeper structure of it, this is something that you can then go and compare to other known Titian works, portraits.
Right.
And expect to find these same kinds of features present.
Yeah.
It's very clear that the lower section of the picture, with his awkward hand and the strange ledge, are a later repair. And with this evidence, we can now go back to the National Trust to discuss how to treat the portrait. Buoyed up by these results, it's back to Petworth, where it's my turn to pay a visit to Alison McCann's vast but immaculately kept archive. Keeping track of a large estate over many hundreds of years generates a lot of paperwork, and files go back to the 1400s. They have valuable records relating to the art collection, and I'm hoping they'll help us uncover when and why our picture was downgraded from a Titian to in the style of Titian.
Do you want to start with the 1920 catalogue?
Good, thank you.
It seems the first record of the demotion was in an inventory made by a man called Collins Baker in 1920.
He made his own attributions or just followed attributions that were existing?
I think he made some of his own, because sometimes he'll say formerly catalogued as, but he's changed it, so he obviously had his own thoughts on things.
Right. So this is 1920s. Can we go any further back?
Yes. This was compiled by Thomas Socket, the local rector of Petworth and general factotum. He did everything, really. But he didn't just do a list of pictures. He actually did diagrams of where they were.
Wow.
There we are.
Ah, so Cardinal de Medici, Titian. And what's this? A fine picture by Titian, bought 1825.
I just found that among the bills. But of course it doesn't tell you which one.
Okay. That's annoying, isn't it?
Very.
A business without data is like a city that has gone dark. Nothing gets done, progress stops. Similarly, a business without data is one that can't exist. Resilient organizations know that data is power. They know data needs to be available anytime, anywhere, to keep the business running. This is data resilience, and Veen is its home.
The patient has lost the ability to speak.
What do you mean he won't get out of the trailer?
Get in.
The man don't look nothing like me. I mean, look at him. Action. Cut!
Could this be our painting? It certainly tells us that George had an eye for a Titian at the time. The other question that's troubling me is who our sitter is, as there's no young Medici cardinal who would fit the dates. That said, I do have a preferred candidate to be our sitter, and his name is Giulio Feltrio della Rovere. He was made a cardinal at the age of 14 in 1547, so that's around about the right date for our portrait. He was made a cardinal by Paul III, who was a great patron of Titian, and both his parents and his brother were painted by Titian too. The slight stumbling block here is that I can find no portrait of young Giulio for us to compare our portrait to. So for now, it'll just have to remain an idea.
George Wyndham eventually grew out of his wild macaroni days and began to behave in a manner fitting for an Earl of Egremont. But he would never settle for a conventional family life.
The main concern for most people in George's position would have been to provide themselves with an heir. However, George seemed somewhat unconcerned by dynastic responsibilities.
He was obviously something of a charmer, with at least 15 mistresses and over 40 illegitimate children. Most surprisingly, they all lived together here at Petworth. One relationship that seemed to have promise was with this woman, Elizabeth Ilve. She was a painter herself and shared the Earl's enthusiasm for art.
They had 7 children and after 17 years eventually got married. However, their 8th and only legitimate child died in infancy. As a result, despite having some 43 children, George left no heir.
Illegitimate or not, George was immensely proud of his 3 oldest sons, who all pursued military careers during the Napoleonic Wars against France. In their honour, George created a little Napoleonic shrine at Petworth with a bust of the Duke of Wellington, a portrait of Old Boney himself, and 2 paintings of the battles in which his sons took part. In 1813, Colonel George Wyndham was present at the Battle of Vittoria in northern Spain as a colonel in the Light Dragoons.
these very, very nice uniforms here with the gold braid, you know, the kind of weird 1970s rock and roll jackets.
Military historian Dan Snow gave me a rundown of what's going on.
So, Dan, what are we looking at?
We are looking at a panoramic vision of one of the most important battles of the Peninsular War, the war in which the Brits, the Portuguese and the Spanish slowly pushed Napoleon's French troops out of Portugal and Spain. And this is the Battle of Vittoria. It's become famous in military history because the French had looted all of the art and all the treasure of Spain. It was in this huge wagon train, and they abandoned it on the battlefield. And Wellington's troops were over it like locusts. All order broke down. They were drinking all the wine. They were smashing everything up. And Wellington was furious about this big breakdown of law and order. But surprisingly, lots of the art ended up in Wellington's house.
2 years later, younger brother Captain Henry Wyndham was present at the Battle of Waterloo.
Probably the most famous battle in British history. Again, the Earl was thrilled that his second oldest son was here at Waterloo and actually played a very important part in the Battle of Waterloo. And this, interestingly, this painting here, you get the swirl, the quite impressionist swirl of French cavalry. And then in the distance, you get a thin red line. Line of redcoats on that ridge up there. And at the Battle of Waterloo, Wellington was fighting one of the greatest commanders in history, and he didn't move an inch. He just lined up his men and told them that they're going to dig their graves on that hill and wait for reinforcements. And everything that Napoleon could throw at them, they just rebuffed. Wellington had anchored his line with a series of farmhouses that were like strong points. And right on the far edge over here somewhere, there should be one called Hougoumont, which is where Henry Wyndham was based. And Napoleon wanted to seize it, and it became this tit-for-tat battle all day. And at one stage, about 50 French broke into the courtyard of this big chateau and fought terrible, medieval-style fighting. And it was Henry Wyndham who had managed to close the gates. So they cut off this French group inside the courtyard, and the French group were all killed. Wellington later said, success at the Battle of Waterloo hinged on the gates of Hougoumont being shut.
Oh, so a hugely definitive moment.
Properly important moment. And it's a moment of one individual helping to change the course of battle.
Henry Wyndham was said to have been so traumatized by the closing of the gates at Hougoumont that for the rest of his life he could never bring himself to close a door.
In Simon's studio, the young cardinal has been removed from his frame and is looking slightly forlorn. We're about to start some gentle explorations of the surface varnish.
So we're going to go on top of the white area here, and the white is generally good to test on because you can actually see colour change. And straight away, the varnish is beginning to dissolve. And look at that. So we're getting, it's marvellous to see that result.
So I think this is the oldest picture you and I have worked on.
Is that right?
Yeah, first half of the 16th century.
It's amazing when you think about it, isn't it, really? I love this now. This is a modern painting in its time. So let's try on the skin colours down here next door to the white. Yeah. Straight away, beginning to dissolve. There she goes.
Oh, a hint of a much nicer drawing line of red on the top of that finger.
Yep. Nice, very nice.
As the varnish and overpaint gave way, it quickly became clear that the clumsy hand had been repainted at some point. It's all very encouraging. And finally, we're on to the cardinal's face, where there's a detail that I believe is a compelling clue to the identity of the painter.
This is a classic Titian technique. Do you see where you get the edge of the black of the pupil?
Yeah.
And then there's a little bit of ground, and then you get the white.
Yes.
It's absolutely Titian. In fact, I took a photo of one the other day. I was going to show you. Look, here we are. This is a
Another cardinal, in fact. Do you see? Dark
yes,
ground layer, white.
Yeah, yeah.
Titian's ability to give his portraits this sense of an inner life is something that makes his work so recognizable. Peter Humphrey is a leading expert on Titian and has been studying the master for 40 years.
So what is it about Titian that gets you out of bed in the morning?
I'm tempted to say it's his colour, which of course is magnificent, rich, intense, particularly his crimsons and his blues. And that's the aspect of Titian's art that's always excited the greatest admiration. But I think that what gives me really the greatest visceral pleasure is his brushwork. When it came to brushwork, Titian knew every trick in the book, or rather, he invented the box of tricks. And then also with Titian's portraits, I think there is always some sort of sense of inner life, of inner personality, of what Leonardo called the motions of the mind.
I'm a huge fan of Titian's portraits. Am I exaggerating things to say that he almost invented our concept of the modern portrait in Western art?
I think I agree that Titian provided the most admired model for future generations, and particularly in the 17th century for the great painters of the 17th century like Rubens or Van Dyck or Velázquez or even Rembrandt.
That's quite a bold claim for Titian's influence. So to stand this one up, let's go and have a look at some examples. My first stop is Florence, where Titian has been popular for 500 years. The ruling Medici family and their successors, the Grand Dukes of Tuscany, built up an impressive collection of Titians, many of which you can see today in the Pitti Palace. There's a painting here that will give us a little peek into Titian's box of tricks. It's from early in his career, about 20 years before I think the Petworth Cardinal was painted.
Oh, I just love this wonderful portrait of a member of the Mosti family here in the Pitti Palace. It's so good. The details in the face and the little hairs around his mouth, they're so tangible. And also the fur on his costume, you feel like you can ruffle it. But most impressive of all, I think, is the way he's sort of appearing from the picture frame at us. He's leaning nonchalantly on his arm, his hand is resting casually on the book, and you get the sense that he's prepared to engage with us in whatever meaty topic of the day was going on in 16th century Italy. Now, you might wonder why I'm getting so excited about what is really a relatively normal portrait in the great scheme of things, but that's the point. When Titian painted this, it wasn't normal. Titian invents what we consider to be normal modes of portraiture in Western art. And here I think it's important to judge Titian not on what came after him, but what came before him. Before Titian, portraiture was focused all on the face, smaller formats, head and shoulders, and sometimes you get the sense that artists weren't really sure what to do with things like arms and hands. Think even of the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci, beautifully painted, exquisite details, but it's all about that fidelity, and even with her hands you get the sense that they're just sort of slightly perched rather awkwardly. But Titian is so good, he allows his sitters to dominate the composition rather than the other way round. And that's why here, that effect of the sitter leaning on his shoulder, appearing out of the picture frame towards us, works so well. He's here. He's real. If Titian invented the modern portrait, then 100 years later the young Anthony van Dyck picked up the ball and ran with it. In 1621, he set out from his native city of Antwerp on a pilgrimage to Italy to see as many Titians as he possibly could. Fortunately, he kept a notebook of his travels with detailed annotated drawings of all the paintings he managed to see. You could see how profoundly influenced Van Dyck was by all the Titians that he saw here in Italy. When you leaf through his Italian sketchbook, I got a facsimile of it here. It's just page after page of Titian. Titian, 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 Titian. I mean, he was obsessed with Titian. Van Dyck had his itinerary mapped out from one Titian to the next. But as well as exploring the painter's technique, as a Northern European in Italy, he was particularly struck by the power and warmth of colour. And nowhere did this have a more lasting effect on his art than in Titian's home city. Tiziano Vecellio, who we call Titian, lived, worked and died in Venice. And he's regarded as the city's greatest painter, a genius of the late Renaissance. There is something seductive about this idea of genius. In art history, we tend to focus on the individual skills of artists, their technical abilities. And it's true, Titian was an artistic genius. But I think his talents were also shaped by the unique environment of this city. There was something else behind Titian's genius. This. Venice is a city built on water. It floods frequently. In winter, it's cold and damp. In the summer, hot and humid. You don't need to be a fine art conservator to know that paintings and salt water don't mix well. This made Venice a severe test for an artist. The ancient practice of painting fresco was more or less impossible, thanks to the damp and the salt water in the air, something Titian discovered to his bitter cost. The building behind me is the Fondaco dei Tedeschi, the house of the German merchants. When it was built in 1506, one of the artists commissioned to decorate the outside with brightly coloured frescoes was the young Titian, and by all accounts his work was widely admired, but unfortunately it didn't last very long. Almost as soon as they were finished, the frescoes began to disintegrate. 40 years later, the painter and first historian of the Renaissance, Giorgio Vasari, lamented their loss in his Lives of the Artists. I know nothing more harmful to fresco painting than the sirocco, especially near to the sea, where it carries a salt moisture with it.
A business without data is like a city that has gone dark. Nothing gets done, progress stops. Similarly, a business without data is one that can't exist. Resilient organizations know that data is power. They know data needs to be available anytime, anywhere, to keep the business running. This is data resilience, and Veen is its home.
The next best thing, painting on wooden panels, was just as difficult, for wood warped and split in the humid air. The solution was all around them. Sailcloth. Painting on canvas was to fundamentally affect the way artists in Venice worked. The thing about painting onto canvas rather than something solid like a wall or a panel is that it responds differently to the application of the brush. It absorbs and it gives and it fights back. So if you're a good artist, it invites a different way of painting. But there was another significant advantage that Venetian artists had. As a maritime trading empire, Venice had access to vivid and precious pigments from the east, like blue lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and Indian yellow, said to be made from the urine of cows fed on mangoes. Put all this together, and you have a unique set of circumstances that made Venetian painting different. To see what happened when you added Titian's genius to this heady mixture, I've come to the Basilica of Santa Maria Gloriosa dei Frari, to see one of his early masterpieces, the Pesaro Madonna.
It's just been restored, and it shows how Titian used the intense Venetian colours to dramatic effect. He set the scene outside, against an azure sky, and the sunlight intensifies the potent blue and yellow of St. Peter's cloak and the vivid red of the Madonna's dress. You can sense Titian's restless energy in every brushstroke. There's something else about this picture that was revolutionary and helped to establish Titian's reputation as a genius. It's a simple thing, really. The Madonna is not in the centre of the picture, and for Titian's audience this would have been radical and challenging. But he gets away with it by using the drama of colour to draw your eye up towards her, making her the focus of attention. Crucial to the picture's dramatic impact are the two enormous stone columns soaring towards heaven. X-rays show that they were only added as Titian developed the composition, and he moved them around in the process of painting the picture, something that was much easier to achieve on canvas. On his Titian tour, 100 years later, the young Anthony van Dyck came and saw this painting. He was so impressed, he made a knockoff version for his local church in Antwerp. You can see he's reversed the composition, but all the details are faithfully copied, right down to the colossal columns whose foundations fall dramatically away into the picture space. The more of Titian's work Van Dyck saw, the more he fell under his spell, and the more he understood how the box of tricks worked. There was one painting by his new muse that laid bare so much of Titian's working method that Van Dyck tried to buy it. The painting was made for the Farnese family, one of the most powerful dynasties in Italy. If I tell you that it was never finished, and it was rejected by the man who commissioned it, you might not think it sounds like a picture to get excited about. But you'd be wrong.
This has been called the greatest psychological portrait of all time, and I think that's probably right. There's so much drama going on. The subject is Pope Paul III and his grandsons, and I know that popes aren't supposed to have grandsons, but back in the 1500s they did things a little bit differently. In the middle here we've got Alessandro Farnese, Pope Paul III. Behind him is his oldest grandson, also Alessandro Farnese, and over here on the right is the younger grandson, Ottavio Farnese. Now, according to the rules of primogeniture of the day, Alessandro up here should have got the titles and the cash, but he'd been made a cardinal when he was much younger for strategic reasons, so Ottavio got all the earthly goods, and that created a great deal of tension between the two brothers. And at the time this was painted, Ottavio was busy plotting against his grandfather, and Titian has had great fun with this family dynamic. Ottavio is entering the scene from stage right, and he's about to greet his grandfather in the traditional way that you greet a pope. He's going to kiss his foot. And here is the pope's beautifully slippered foot. Now, what Titian can do with that great sense of creating movement is present Ottavio in a pose that we know he's not standing still. He's not about to just hold that pose, but he's clearly in the sense of motion. And what's stopping this motion is the drama of the glance between grandfather and grandson. And that's the powerful narrative of the picture.
In Italy at the time, there were two schools of thought on how you should approach a painting. In Florence, they taught disegno, drawing the subject carefully before you painted on top. In Venice, they would just go straight to the canvas with the paint, using colour, colore, to map out their image and refine the work as they went along.
In this picture, we can see colore at its maximum extent because there are so many signs of changes and busy underdrawing that don't really relate to anything in particular. The picture is so sketchy and busy and boldly painted. There's no evidence that he's very carefully thought of everything first. He's come to the canvas and decided to do battle with it. He's felt much more relaxed about changing things and making it all fit together. And the end result is just something that's absolutely mind-blowing. I'm not surprised Van Dyck tried to buy this painting because it gives him so many clues as to how Titian worked. He also did rather a nice little sketch of it in his sketchbook. Back in London, real progress is being made on the restoration. After an assessment of the X-rays and infrared scans, the young cardinal from Petworth has been the subject of a great deal of discussion between Simon and the National Trust conservators, and several areas of later overpaint have been removed. This is the point in a restoration when things can look slightly scary.
Oh, what have you done? Looks like you've got a flock of nervous pigeons flying around in here. What's all the grey stuff?
The small areas of grey is where the picture has been filled, and those are old damages. This painting has been through the wars.
And what about the stitching? It looks like Dr. Frankenstein has been at work here. It's not even straight, is it?
And it's not actually the end of the canvas. It's where two canvases have been overlaid with each other and then stitched through in the most bizarre manner.
Okay.
We've taken off as much as we can, going all the way down to the edge of the original canvas. So we're going to now reinstate his cassock.
Right.
And reincorporate the remains of that red that's down there.
Okay.
Which is more in keeping with how the artist paints.
Right. I have to say, I'm not... I don't like the hand. I know the hand looks better than it did before, where you've taken off those weird additional fingers. But it's the wrong colour, isn't it? I mean, the pink tones of the face are much more sophisticated than the pink tones in the hand.
And I have to say also that the quality of paint application down here is not as clever as the
It's not at
head.
all. Well, things get better the further up I go. I mean, the head looks to be in pretty good state. There's only a couple of areas of fill there. It still looks very good, the head.
The head is very good, yeah. And actually the environment of the head as well, the hair and the volume of the neck and the cowl on the back of his clothes, and personality back in the eyes and things like that as well. And we are now at the point of texturing and retouching.
Okay. So you've got to channel your inner Titian for the next few weeks.
I have.
From your position there, nose to the canvas, are you feeling still Titian possibilities like I do?
I have very strong views about that. Yes, I think the head and head and shoulders are by somebody who is a great artist.
The question is, are we going to be able to get enough original quality out of it for an attribution?
It's all in the head.
It's all in the head.
The National Trust is part of the fabric of British life today. It looks after our heritage and lets us come and take a look at places our forebears would never have seen.
The Trust's role as custodian of country houses is a relatively recent development in their history. It came about due to the perseverance of one man, James Lees Milne, who during the Second World War cycled around England trying to persuade owners to donate their homes to the nation. He was the secretary of the Country Houses Committee of the Trust, and one of the houses he visited was Petworth.
The National Trust were very fortunate in having a champion of James Lees Milne's charm and expertise to persuade financially challenged aristocrats to part company with their ancestral homes. But his diaries reveal a rather caustic attitude to some of the owners, including Lord Leconfield, at that time the owner of Petworth. Their first meeting was not encouraging. My first impression was of a pompous old ass, with a blue face and fish eyes. He seemed to deliberately misunderstand what the National Trust was all about. He implied that we would turn him out of the house the moment we took over. 2 years later, in 1947, things had changed, at least from Lord Leconfield's side. Today he was very friendly and not at all pompous or absurd. We lunched together. I was not sent to the servants' hall. Whatever James Lees Milne felt about Lord Leconfield, he was keen to find some way to preserve the house and its world-class art collection from being broken up and dispersed on his death. When they had lunch at Petworth in 1947, his lordship was facing a tax bill of 75% on the estate. Andy Lex explained how a final settlement was worked out.
While an arrangement had already been made that the family could live in part of the house and some of it would be open to the public along with the park, there was still a question mark around the art collection itself. Mm-hmm. New legislation was introduced to allow families to give works of art in lieu of duty as well as property, which had never happened before. And Petworth was a test case, really, for that, being such an important collection, which undoubtedly would have been dispersed because of the duties that would have been payable on it after the war. And the National Gallery came and made an initial assessment, and then roughly 200 paintings were accepted in lieu of duty. And the family got somewhere around £500,000 worth of additional tax relief in lieu of those 200 pictures. But actually, at the time, they were worth close to £1 million. So they didn't get such a good deal financially, but the family were always very happy that the collection had at least been saved.
So overall, it was a win-win situation?
It was a win-win situation, and in a way, Petworth paved the way for many similar deals that came about subsequently.
Happily for us, 2 paintings included in the job lot eventually accepted in lieu of tax were the Unknown Cardinal and the portrait of a lady from Genoa.
The Italian port city of Genoa is a bit of an overlooked gem today. When Van Dyck arrived here in 1621, it was already a city in decline, but the party was still in full swing. It was once the equal and rival of Venice, a great seafaring city-state, birthplace of Columbus and countless admirals, but its merchant bankers ensured it was still a wealthy city. In his travelogue, Pictures from Italy, Charles Dickens waxed lyrical about Genoa. When shall I forget the streets of palaces? The walls within alive with masterpieces by Van Dyck. For the young painter, it was the perfect place to put into practice the tricks he'd learned on the Titian trail. And he added his own ingredient, glamour.
Like most artists, Van Dyck was very good at following the money. And of the 6 years he spent in Italy, most of his time was here in Genoa, where he picked up lucrative commissions to cover the vast walls of the palazzi that line the narrow streets. And there was an awful lot of wall space to fill, because the super-rich oligarchs of Genoa took palazzo building almost as a competitive sport. And the very best of them are here in the Strada Nuova, which is surely one of the finest streets in the world.
Van Dyck seemed instinctively to know how to paint luxury, to express the money, the jewellery, the rich fabrics, and above all the beautiful people in creamy, buttery oil paint. He would certainly have been familiar with this building. The Palazzo Rosso was home to the Brignole family. And in support of my conviction that the Petworth lady from Genoa is by Van Dyck, is this symphony in blue and gold.
What a portrait. She's clearly someone rich and powerful, and yet at the same time, she's very human and almost rather fragile. There's a flicker of a smile on her face too, and that's that amazing sense of personality that you get in Van Dyck's portraits, and which is something I think we see in our portrait from Petworth.
The 2 paintings also share the fashionably dark Genoese costumes, long, elegant hands, and perfectly placed flecks of gold-painted highlights. I suspect the 2 ladies would have known each other.
Van Dyck's great trick in portraits like this was never to allow his sitters' demands for the blingy costume and the grand columns to overwhelm their very human presence. And he does this by introducing a sense of movement, and this is something he gets from Titian. That sense of movement is vital because it helps break the spell of formality and make someone seem real and believable. And in this picture, she's clearly gliding off stage left.
Van Dyck captured perfectly the qualities of grace, ease, and nonchalance that embody the quintessential Italian notion of sprezzatura, the sense of doing something effortlessly, without being seen to try too hard.
One of the things I've always liked about Van Dyck is that although he was a precociously gifted artist, perhaps in terms of handling paint, the most talented there's ever been, he wasn't an arrogant artist. And by that I mean he was always prepared to learn from those who'd gone before him. And after 6 years of absorbing everything Titian that he could, he had evolved into a more fully complete and rounded artist. Add into that a canny ability to tickle the vanity of the wealthy and the powerful, and you had the makings of a truly international art megastar.
Resilient organisations know that data is power. They know data needs to be available anytime, anywhere, to keep the business running. This is data resilience, and Veen is its home.
Petworth is one of the very best places to experience the fruits of this genius. The animation and sense of a living, breathing person that Titian developed in the early 16th century was Van Dyck's inspiration 100 years later, to which he added his own veneer of glamour. These two painters left a legacy that transformed the art of portrait painting, and nowhere was that more influential on the generations that followed them than in Britain. The Protestant Reformation had put an end to religious painting in Britain. Unable to paint God, we painted ourselves, and nobody painted us better than Van Dyck. The two paintings from Petworth are minor players in this story, and they have both suffered from neglect and unsympathetic restoration. I believe The Lady from Genoa deserves to be recognised as a work by Van Dyck. But after Simon's restoration, is the young cardinal good enough to be by Titian? The later edition of the shelf on which he was resting his hand has gone, and with the cleaning of the old varnish, there is a new twinkle of life in his eyes. We've asked Peter Humphrey to have a look at the painting and give us his opinion.
So, Peter, here we have it, what we believe to be our Titian.
Yeah, very handsome.
As Peter gave the picture a really close examination, I hoped he would see the all-important motions of the mind in the cardinal's eyes.
Well, I do think that some of the handling is really very beautiful. These kind of squiggles in the cape here, which are so sketchy, but nevertheless evoke the silky texture of the surface.
Yeah.
But above all, I feel that the face, which is the best preserved part of the picture, has a sense of interior life, of personality. I don't think an imitator of Titian could come up with. It's Titianesque, but to me it doesn't look like a workshop picture.
Yeah.
Well, that's very encouraging. Thank you.
I do have to exercise some caution, but in conclusion, I can say that it's there's a very good chance it's by Titian. Yes.
Okay. So, would you be happy for the National Trust to call this attributed to Titian?
I think that would be a more justifiable label than the present one, the School of Titian, which was obviously a very cautious description from the past.
And in fact, underneath this frame is a much larger label which just says Titian, which was the original label on the frame. So maybe we'd be justified in
so
swapping
somebody downgraded it, and now perhaps it, especially after your treatment of it, it deserves a bit of upgrading.
So Petworth will be pleased. Petworth, now fully open for the summer, is still missing a picture from the space over the fireplace in the marble hall. After locking the doors at the end of the day, the guides and volunteers stayed on to find out what we had uncovered about a portrait they know so well. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us here. So I know this is a painting that you're all familiar with, but you may notice that there have been a few modifications. I'm going to hand over to Bendor, who's going to tell us a little bit more about that.
Thank you very much. Well, the really good news is that the best preserved part of the painting is the sitter's head. And of course, in a portrait, that is the most important thing. And we have revealed a portrait of quite extraordinary quality. And I have to say, of all the paintings that we've worked on Britain's Lost Masterpieces, this, for me, has been the one that I've been most excited about.
A room full of National Trust guides is a daunting audience. There's not much these people don't know about Petworth, and it's great to be adding our own little chapter to the house's story.
We've showed the picture to Professor Peter Humphrey, who's one of the world's great experts on Titian, and in his opinion, School of Titian was an injustice. So he thought that this was certainly a Titian-esque painting. The next level up from that is something that would have been painted in Titian's workshop, and we would call that workshop or studio of Titian. And I'm pleased to be able to say that Peter Humphrey thought that this picture was too good to be something you could call workshop of Titian. And the next level above that is, of course, Titian himself. But because we haven't been able to find any earlier documentation when he came here in the early 19th century, we've got to be a little bit cautious. So we'll have to say attributed to Titian, which means we're pretty certain this is by Titian, but we just have to leave a little bit of room for doubt. So it gives me a tremendous pleasure to be able to say that this fantastic portrait of a young cardinal can now go back in pride of place in your state entrance, and will no longer labour under the misapprehension of School of Titian, but let's just go... Quite. Let's just change the label, and I think we can go with Titian now. So, there we are.
We're absolutely delighted to have a third Titian in the collection. That in its own right is wonderful. But perhaps what makes this one extra exciting is that it was a picture that was bought by one of our great heroes, the third Earl of Egremont, in the early 19th century. So to have his judgment vindicated in this way is really the icing on the cake.